They laughed at my cooking like it was some kind of joke. My own family sat at the table, making faces, whispering insults they thought I couldn't hear. Every bite I served was met with smirks and fake gags, like I was some failure in my own kitchen. I had poured my heart into that meal, hours of chopping, stirring, seasoningly to be treated like I was nothing. That night, as I cleared their untouched plates, I smiled through the sting in my chest. They thought I was weak, just an old woman desperate for their approval. What they didn't know was that I'd been cooking up something much bigger. And this time, the taste I served wouldn't be one they'd ever forget. Let me tell you what really happened the night. I decided to give them a different kind of dinner. It wasn't just about the food, it was about respect. Every time they mocked me, it cut deeper than they realized. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes when I brought out the casserole, whispering to my son that Mom can't even boil water right. My grandkids pushed their plates away, begging for pizza instead. My son didn't defend me. He laughed along, like humiliating me was some kind of family game. I went to bed that night with tears soaking my pillow, wondering how the people I sacrificed for could treat me like this. I thought of all the nights I skipped meals so my boy could eat, all the mornings I woke up early to pack his lunches, all forgotten like dust on the floor. Their laughter echoed in my ears long after the dishes were washed. That's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. And anger, I realized, could be my secret ingredient. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen staring at my recipe box, the one filled with my mother's and grandmother's handwriting. These weren't just meals. They were pieces of history, traditions carried through generations. If my family thought I was a joke, I'd remind them that I was the backbone of everything they had. I started planning, carefully testing recipes when no one was around, making small adjustments, writing down secret notes. But it wasn't just about flavor anymore. No, this was about timing, patience, and the satisfaction of watching their smug smiles fade. I pretended to accept their ridicule, even joining in on the laughs, to keep suspicion away. Inside, though, I was sharpening my knives not just for cooking, but for revenge. My plan wasn't about poison or danger, nothing illegal. It was about control, about making them choke on every insult they'd ever thrown at me. And I knew exactly when I'd served my payback, the night of the family gathering. When the family gathering finally came, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled, poured drinks, and even let my son-in-law make another snide joke about my famous cardboard chicken. Everyone laughed, and I pretended to laugh with them, but inside my pulse was steady. Calm, because this time, I had prepared dishes so rich, so layered, that they'd have no choice but to notice. I spent all day in the kitchen perfecting every detail, the roast seasoned with herbs they'd never tasted before, bread baked golden with a secret recipe, even a dessert that melted on the tongue. As they sat down, I served them carefully, watching each bite like a hawk. At first, they smirked, ready for disappointment. But when the flavors hit, their expressions changed, one by one. Silence fell, forks slowed, and their laughter faded into confusion. I hid my grin behind a napkin, thinking, now, let's see who's the joke. At first, nobody wanted to admit it. My daughter tried to keep her smirk, but she kept sneaking glances at her plate like she couldn't believe what she was tasting. My son-in-law, usually the loudest critic, chewed slowly, his brow furrowed as if he was trying to find something wrong but couldn't. Even my grandson, who usually pushed food around with his fork, asked for seconds without hesitation. I sat there calm and collected, sipping my drink, letting the awkward silence stretch. Finally, my son muttered, "Mom, this is actually really good." The table froze. He looked embarrassed to admit it, but the truth was out. I leaned back, my smile small but sharp. "Oh," I said softly, "so it turns out I do know how to cook after all." Their faces dropped, and for the first time, they had no snappy comeback. That silence was sweeter than any dessert I'd ever made, but I wasn't finished. I let them stew in their discomfort for a while, then calmly revealed the kicker. "You know," I said, tapping my fork against the plate, "this recipe wasn't even mine. It's the same one Grandma used to make when you were kids. The same one you all used to praise as the best food you'd ever had." Their eyes widened because they remembered. I had deliberately cooked her exact dishes, the ones they used to beg me to learn. The irony was brutal. The flavors they were mocking all these years were the very flavors of the woman they claimed to idolize. My daughter's face turned red, my son-in-law avoided eye contact, and even my son couldn't hide his shame. The room grew hot with guilt, and I just kept smiling. This wasn't just about food anymore, this was about respect. And they finally knew how badly they'd failed me. They scrambled to cover themselves, tripping over weak excuses. My daughter mumbled something about just joking, while my son tried to laugh it off like nothing happened. But I wasn't letting them wriggle out this time. I looked each of them in the eye and said, "You mocked me for years, called me out of touch, acted like I was nothing more than a burden in this house. But tonight, I made you taste your own disrespect." Silence filled the room. They couldn't argue with the truth, not when the evidence was steaming on their plates. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, just let the weight of my words hang heavy. For once, they weren't the ones laughing. Their arrogance had cracked wide open, and I saw guilt rush in to fill the space. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted. My daughter pushed her plate away, her hands trembling just a little, and for the first time in years, she couldn't look at me. My son leaned back in his chair, speechless, his smug grin completely gone. The room felt heavy, like the walls themselves were pressing in, forcing them to face what they had done. I didn't yell, I didn't even raise my voice, I just let the silence choke them. And in that silence, they finally understood what it felt like to be humiliated by the people you love the most. My daughter whispered, "Mom, we didn't mean," but the words caught in her throat. I raised my hand, stopping her cold. "You meant every word," I said quietly. "And now you've tasted what it feels like to be on the other side of your cruelty." Their shame was louder than any apology they could muster. I stood from the table, cleared the plates one by one, and carried them to the sink without another word. They both sat frozen, trapped in the weight of what had just happened, and I knew that silence was the sharpest blade I could leave them with. I didn't need to scream or demand an apology. The damage was already done. From that night on, family dinners were never the same. They watched their words, chose them carefully, and every time they glanced at me, I saw the shadow of guilt flicker across their faces. That was my victory, not the food, not the payback itself, but the permanent reminder that I wasn't someone to be mocked or belittled. They had laughed at my cooking, but what I served them in return was something far harder to swallow, the taste of their own disrespect. And trust me, it lingered longer than any meal ever could.